Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. I'll just say, if you're new to the channel and you enjoy this video, then please consider hitting subscribe, and if you're already a subscriber, then thank you very much. It's Easter weekend and we've had 4 days of really heavy rains, strong winds, stormy conditions. This isn't the kind of weather where you just stick on some waterproofs and go out and brave it. This is the kind of weather where the official advice is don't go out unless you absolutely need to. We've not suffered too badly here in Campeo, but certainly some of the nearby towns have had some pretty severe flooding issues. I know one of the towns about an hour away has actually been cut off a couple of days, with the roads all around being flooded. The sea has been extremely rough. I did manage during a break in the rain to get out on the balcony and just shoot some video of the waves breaking and just the rough sea conditions. And you know, even if you were going out into the sort of mountains, at the moment there's risk of rock falls and landslides, that kind of thing. So it's been a case of just staying in. I have been tempted a few times because there's been some really dark, dramatic clouds, but to be honest, I just don't think it's worth it. The plus side of all this bad weather and being sort of confined to the house is that I've had a chance to edit a couple of videos that will be coming out over the next week or so. And here's a sneak preview. So what I've decided to do is do this video basically in the office, and what I wanted to do was answer a few questions that I've had come through recently. Now, some of those questions have come through on kind of private messages, so on those ones I'm not going to share the names or anything because I don't think it's appropriate, but at least one of the questions was an open comment on one of the videos, so I'll happily share who that one came from. So let's get started. So the first question was one of the ones that came through on a private message, but basically the question was, what white balance setting do I use on my camera when I'm out shooting landscapes? The first thing to say is I don't use any auto white balance at all, and 99.9% of the time my camera is set to daylight or direct sunlight or whatever that setting is. It's kind of the default bright light setting. Because I shoot in RAW, if I want to change the white balance in post, I can do, and I can easily use Lightroom to flick over to cloudy or whatever else I might want to go to. Although, to be honest, most of the time, apart from correcting color cast from ND filters, I tend not to use white balance to sort of change the color tones of the image. I tend to use the split toning and the HSL sliders to do that. But if I want to, I can. I think it's important not to use auto white balance in this type of photography, because if you're shooting panoramas or you're doing focus stacking or you're doing blended exposures where you're bracketing and then subsequently merging those exposures later, if you use auto white balance, there's a possibility that white balance could change between images, and that just makes it that much harder to bring those images together. And to be honest, I actually find that the sort of direct sunlight white balance works the best for me, and gives me the best opportunities to then edit the photo later the way that I want and keep the color contrasts, etc. So the second question is actually a little bit more complicated, and I've actually had 2 or 3 questions around this, and it's to do with the aperture that I choose to use when I'm out shooting landscapes. Now, if you've watched my videos, you'll know that a lot of my landscapes are shot at f11, And I've had a couple of questions about, wouldn't it be easier to shoot with a smaller aperture, say f16 or f18 or f22, to have more depth of field and therefore avoid having to focus stack? And I've also had the opposite question, which is, wouldn't the lens produce better results, sharper results, if I was shooting with a larger aperture, say f8 or f5.6? And actually, it's a really interesting topic, which you could spend hours on, but I'll try and do a reasonably quick answer. So no matter how good the lens is, it doesn't produce consistent results throughout its range in terms of aperture. As a general rule, if the aperture is wide open, so if I use my 16 to 35 lens as an example, wide open on that is f4. And in general, it's considered that at f4 it will not be as sharp as it will be if you stop down a little bit, say to f8. And there's all sorts of reasons why that might be, but in general, if you've got the aperture wide open, it's bringing light in from across the entire surface of the lens, therefore any imperfections in the lens, which there will be in even the best lenses, are likely to produce a bit more distortion. At the other end of the scale, if you go to very small apertures, so you go f16, f18, f22 and so on, then something called diffraction creeps in, which is something to do with the way the light is bounced around by the smaller aperture. The practical upshot of this is that somewhere in the middle between wide open and fully closed is where the lens is going to perform at its best. Now, when I got my new lenses, I did some tests. What I did was I set the camera up pointing at a flat scene with lots of detail. In fact, what I used was some printed sheets of paper with basically typed in print on. And then I took shots at, again using the 16 to 35 lens as an example, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16 and f22. I then took those into Lightroom, and you look at them in the normal view in Lightroom and you can't see any difference. Zooming into 100%, the one-to-one view, I could definitely see that f4 was softer than f5.6 and f5.6 was softer than f8. I could also see, going at the other end, I could see the effects of diffraction. So at f16 there was a very slight softening of some of the detail, and at f22 that was quite noticeable. But at f8 and f11 I couldn't see any difference between the sharpness. F8 and f11 looked identical at the 100% or the one-to-one view. So what I did then was I went into a 2-to-1 view and then a 3-to-1 view, and by the time I got to 3-to-1 I could just about make out some difference between f8 and f11, but it was very, very difficult to make that out. So practically speaking, there was no significant difference between f8 and f11. So my default, the starting point when I'm setting a shot up, is f11, because it gives me pretty much the maximum sharpness I'm likely to need, and it also gives me a reasonably good depth of field, so I can minimize the challenges I might have and the need to focus stack. And interestingly enough, my 16 to 35 and my 70 to 200 pretty much have exactly the same sharpness factors. f8 and f11 is pretty much the sharpest areas on them, so I tend to use f11 on both. The 50mm prime that I've got actually has much less drop in sharpness if I go wider. So if I go to f5.6 or f4, it seems to be sharper than the 16 to 35 and the 70 to 200, but again, it's not significant, so again I tend to use f11 on that one. Okay, so the next question was actually a public comment on one of my videos. It was from Robert Hughes, and Robert asked, Let's see. Here's a hypothetical for you. I'd love to see a video on this. Had you completely destroyed your Nikon, this was a comment on the video where my camera fell over and I smashed some filters. So had you completely destroyed your Nikon, what would you have done? Would it be the time to try a mirrorless camera? Would I entertain a switch to Sony, Canon or some of the others? And it's a really good question. So taking this hypothetical all the way, I mean, if my camera and one of my lenses was damaged, obviously I've still got other Nikon lenses, so you know, I'd be tempted to stick with Nikon purely from the point of view of compatibility. So to try and answer this question, I've done a little bit of research and I found it a really difficult question to answer at the moment. I definitely think mirrorless is the way of the future, but at the moment I think the only company that has a mature mirrorless lineup, so that's camera and lenses, is Sony. Sure, with Nikon and Canon they have some lenses that are dedicated to their new mirrorless setup, but not all the way across the focal length range that I would want, and therefore you'd be using an adapter ring and older style or older mount lenses, DSLR mount lenses, and to me that kind of means I'm losing some of the size and weight benefits that mirrorless is supposed to bring. So what would I go for? Well, if I was going out today to try to buy a completely new camera setup, I'd be strongly tempted to go Sony for the maturity of the setup. But on the other hand, I'd also be strongly tempted to go Nikon because I have the familiarity with it. I have the familiarity of the way the controls work and the menu systems and all that kind of thing. Of course, in 6 months' time that could all change, because I'm sure that over the next few months Canon and Nikon will be bringing out more dedicated lenses for their Z mount and R mount respectively. I think that's what it is, and therefore those size and weight benefits will become easier or become more apparent as they bring out more lenses and as they begin to mature the full frame mirrorless lineup. I'm hoping at the moment I don't have to make a choice anytime soon. I love my D810 and I'm certainly hoping to get a few more years out of it. I'm not a big believer that the make and model of the camera makes a huge difference to the photography that you do. If you are looking at the same kind of price point quality lineup within the different ranges, you're going to get similar results, similar quality results, and actually technique and actually just being out there and shooting is much more important than the make and model of camera that you're using. Okay, so that's it. I've answered a few questions and I'm hoping that in the next couple of days the weather's going to clear up sufficiently that it's practical to get out and about. As I said, at the moment there is no way I think it's worth going out in the conditions that we've got, and I'm hoping that maybe we might get a nice transitional period over the next couple of days when the weather gets good enough to go out but still maintains, you know, some atmosphere and drama. But if not, we'll see what we get. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please consider giving it a like or a share or both. And of course, don't forget about that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I'd love to hear from you. So the comments down below, let me know what you think, or if you've got other questions that you'd like me to answer, or indeed if there's something you'd like me to cover techniques or whatever else. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next video from a very wet and stormy Spain. Bye.